Steve.
Just over 4 weeks ago, Rabbi Shapiro stood here in this very spot before those who were attending the Ezra Ritkin Memorial Shir and uttered the words, Nafla Ateres Roshenu, the crown of our head has fallen, to announce the passing of our Rav. It took a while for the magnitude of those words to register with me. Klal Yisrael just lost a Torah giant who was known across the Jewish world and was a valuable resource to Rabbanim throughout the Jewish landscape. We in Elizabeth and Hillside lost our Rav, our spiritual center. He was our conduit to Shemayim, to heaven. Anyone who ever had the privilege to hear his Ne'ilah on Yom Kippur would attest to that. But all I could do was find myself thinking in these first moments that my Rebbe was gone. For the first time in my life, since I was 6 years old, there's no one that I can call Rebbe. Despite having the schus of having had a deep personal relationship with the Rav for the last 55 years, I'm not here this evening to deliver a hesped or my reflections. We will be privileged to hear from family members and two of the preeminent Torah luminaries of our generation tonight. I was asked to preside over this Azkara, over this memorial service, in my capacity as president of the JEC Board of Trustees. It is a position that I've held, I believe, for longer than any past president. The weight of the responsibility is often a challenge, and I've often been asked why I've continued to shoulder the responsibility for so long. My answer's always been that I have hakaras hatov, gratitude for all that the JEC and the Elizabeth community has done for me and my family since I started yeshiva here in 1968. But if I had to distill my motivation down to its very essence, it has been my love and deep admiration for my Rebbe, and my desire to help in preserving the Kehillah that his father established and that he devoted his entire life to nurturing, a united community centered around the thriving yeshiva at its center, which is its heartbeat. I pray that Hashem will bless us with the strength and the vision to recover from this loss and to move forward with great determination and energy to continue building on the legacy that our beloved Rav has left for us. I'd like to call upon Rabbi Avraham Herman, the rabbi of the Elmore Avenue Shul, to recite Kapitel Aleph of Tehillim.
Ashrei ha'ish asher lo holach b'atzas rishoyim u'b'derech chatoyim lo amad u'v'moshav leitzim lo yoshav ki b'toras Adonai chefzo u'b'saraso yege yomam v'lo lo v'yo ke'etz shasul al palgei moyim asher piryo yitein bito v'oleu lo yibol v'chol asher yaseh yatzliach Lochein horishoim ki im kamot asher tidfenu ruach. Akei lo yokum rishoim b'mishpat v'chatoyim ba'adas tzadikim. Ki yodeya Adonai derech tzadikim v'derech rishoim tovei.
Rav of Congregation Adas Yisrael, Rabbi Shimi Steinmetz, will read Kapitel Tesvav.
Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai mi yagor ba'alecha, mi yishkon b'harkachecha, holech tamim ufoel tzedek, v'dover emes bilvavo, lo ragal al lishono, lo asal re'ehu ra, v'cherpa lo nasal krovo, nivze beinav nimas, v'esirei Adonai yichabed, nishba leharav lo yamir, kaspo lo nasan b'neshech, v'shochad al naki lo lakach, osei lo yimot leolam.
Rabbi Shaya Winiarz, Rabbi of Congregation Beis Hillel, to read Kapitel Chof Gimel.
Mizmor leDavid, Adonai Roi lo echzor, v'nosteh sheyavitzeni, al mei menuchos yinahaleni, nafshi yeshovev, yancheni b'maglei tzedek lema'an shemo. Gam ki elech begeit zalma, v'eslo yireh ra ki ata imadi, shivtecha mishantecha, hema yinachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged tzoroi, dishantav Hashem en roshi kosi rivaya. Ach tov v'chesed yedefuni kol yimei chayai, v'shavti b'veis Adonai le'arech yomim.
It's a privilege to call upon Rav Feinstein, Rosh Yeshiva, Yeshiva Staten Island, for Divrei Askara.
Back with Rav Elazar M, back probably to 1951 or two, I'm not sure. That's about the thing that he was in Shir Beis when I came to Teitz. I called him Rav Elazar M because that's everybody knew him, Elazar M. He was even a prodigy then. I don't know how old he was in that years, but Shir Beis means second year of college. That's what Shir Beis meant. That's how I met him. Now, we use the terminology lightly, but that's something we have to learn in the union of, we keep Svireh because the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva died between the Pesach and Shavuos because they didn't want to mechabed each other. And for me it struck very difficult to claim such a thing. Rabbi Akiva is a Talmud of Rav Elazar, who was very makbid on Koved Chaveroi. So how could he not respect each other's thing? Probably was the first thing he taught. But then I thought about it, and I remember from my youth too, that the main thing is the people that were friends with you, with the youth, they remain the names of the youth. You remember, you respect them as your friend, but you don't respect their Torah. You expect them as I love you because you're you, but not because you're Talmud Chacham or anything else. And that's a point that's a bit missing for us. We have to recognize who he was. And he was a big Talmud Chacham. Now, the Shpach, as far as I know, was Rabbi Preil was here before, Rav Pinchas, Mordechai, Rav Pinchas, and him. And in Klal Yisrael also, Pinchas, Mordechai, a lot of work, stuff, because in the early I guess it was, I don't remember, it was the late 50s or the early 60s. They wanted us to Shrita that time. You guys, I see people are nodding their heads and they remember. And how active he was. He used to go down to the talk shows. And he would just march in as if he owned the place, and they were all so scared of him that he was able to take over the whole place and start darshaning about the stuff. And Rav Elazar Meir took over, and I assume Yotze Hashem, his son. And it's pshat it's something we have to learn from today's settler. Or in Pashas Truma, you're collecting, it says, the Beishim says, I want you to collect Truma, and he tells you a whole bunch of things he wants you to collect for him, and I want you to make a mikdash for me. That's what he says. But it's interesting, in the things that you're collecting has nothing to do with the mikdash. We're not collecting the Avnei Noyam and the Avnei Luyim, which only has to do with the Bigdei Kahuna. So why are we calling it, you make a mikdash? But obviously, the leader is the mikdash. When you're making a mikdash and you don't have the proper leader, it's not a mikdash. You have to have the proper leader, and that's that's a big loss. Is that proper leader? And people get old, and the thing, I think, was utilizing his children, and the idea is, but there's no retirement. At the end of Parshas B'chukaisai, it talks about the Maisa Behema. You have to put, when the 10th animal that goes by, and that's you put a mark on it. It says, you can't make sure which one goes out, the 10th one. And then it says, you can't exchange it. So my father used to ask, can't exchange it. I mean, if you can't making sure which one goes out, so you surely can't exchange it. It's a Kalvachema. So always be the Havamina that we have to put it. She tells you to pick who's going to be the next one. That we can't, it's not in our hands. God does it, or whatever it is, or the person himself picks who he's going to be. But the thing is, there's no retirement either. Once you are picked, no matter Toivara, you're there forever. There's no retirement. You may need help, you may do other things, but you're still there. You're the leader. You're still going to be the leader. And that's what the Rav Elazar Meir did. I mean, it should be what do you call it? A good better for the whole family, for ganz Klal Yisrael, for the community, and Yotze Hashem, that we should be seeing soon the Tchias HaMeisa.
I'd like to call upon Rav Hershel Schechter, Rosh Yeshiva, Yeshivas Rabbeinu ztvk'l for Divrei Haskala.
Teitz used to deliver. He was a real rabbi's rabbi. And his son, Zichrono Livracha, it was only natural that the son should be influenced by his father and follow in his footsteps. Rabbi Teitz founded the Tehillim. Now, everybody has a shul, they call it a Tehillim. Tehillim means a shul with a mikveh, with a yeshiva. You have to have everything. Rav Elazar M's early Torah education was here in the JEC. But before he reached the age of 10, his parents felt that they had to send him out of town. Before the age of 10, they had to send him out of town because they felt that they wanted him to get more Torah. So he spent time learning in Torah Das, that's in New York, and in Cleveland, in the Teitz Yeshiva. He was very influenced when he was in Teitz. So he was influenced by the three prominent Rabbanim who were there at that time: Rabbi Meir Bloch, Rabbi Katz, and Rabbi Chagifta ztvk'l. When he was still a teenager, he was sent to Ponevezh, a different world. Ponevezh, a different world. He was very influenced by Rabbi Levenstein, who was the Mashgiach at that time. Rabbi Shmuel Rozovsky, originally when he founded Ponevezh Yeshiva, Shmuel Rozovsky was the only Maggid Shia. Later they got Rav Shach to come on board, but originally it was only Rabbi Shmuel Rozovsky. And when he was Talmud at that time in Ponevezh, he would be learning the Charusa with people who are very prominent now at that time. They weren't that famous. Rabbi Beryl Povarsky, Shlita, Rabbi Avigdor Nebenzahl, Shlita, Rabbi Meir Schlesinger, Shiluchya, Rabbi Michael Feinstein, Rabbi Michael Feinstein later became the son-in-law of Rabbi Elazar Soloveitchik. His father, Rabbi Pinchas Mordechai, wanted Rav Elazar M to get smicha from the chief Rabbi Herzog in Eretz Yisrael. That was the style at that time. So the young teenager, he was only a teenager when he went to get smicha. So he went to the office of the chief rabbi, and the style was that there would be somebody there who would faher you to determine whether you deserve smicha or not. So the one who was fahering asked him, what's the last mesichta that you learned? And he kept on asking questions. He gave the young boy, young Rav Elazar M, he gave him the Gemara that he said he just learned last, and he was shooting questions at it the whole time. Then he did very well. Then he said, what Gemara did you learn before that? So he took out the Gemara, he gave it to the young man, and the boychum was asking him questions, and every daf and every taisus, he did pretty well. Then he said, what mesichta did you learn before that? So he took out from the bookcase another Gemara, fahered him on that. Then a fourth time, what mesichta did you learn before that? The last four mesichtas. He asked him all the questions, he knew all the answers. So he wrote a note, and he said, give the note to Rav Herzog. The young boy didn't look at the note, but later on, the bochen asked him, did you look at the note? He says, no. On the note, the bochen said, Yori, Yori, Yod, Yod. So that's why Rav Herzog gave him as a teenager, Yori, Yori, Yod, Yod. The bechina was 2 hours long, 2 hours long, and the last four mesichtas that he learned, and he got Yori, Yori, Yod, Yod. He found out later that the bochen was none other than Rabbi Yash. He knew all the Gemaras by heart, with all the Teitz, and he gave the mesichta to the young man, and he was asking every daf and every Teitz. When Rabbi Teitz came back to America, he assisted his father here in the Tehillim and all aspects of the Tehillim, the shul, the mikveh, the yeshiva, and everything. And after the father passed away, we know Rav Elazar M took over. It's interesting, after his Ketira, the family looked in the files and they found records of over 700 gittin that he had processed. That's a lot, 700 gittin that he had processed. He was often involved. When you write a get, we have machna like the Rambam that you can't write a get in 2 different languages. So the practice is that you write a get, it's not in Hebrew, it's not in Aramaic, it's Rabbinic Hebrew. It's the third language, Rabbinic Hebrew. And all the words are spelled with vowel base. Here we have cities in New Jersey, all over the world, and it's hard to write in Hebrew letters. That's usually an issue for the rabbis to determine what's the correct spelling using Hebrew letters. If you want to write an English or French or Italian name, so Rabbi Elazar M was involved a lot in establishing the correct Hebrew spelling for different cities in New Jersey, as well as other cities all over the country. Whenever people would come to him, a couple wanted to get divorced, he would always try to guide them to settle their differences and to repair their marriage. He was successful every so often. That's what the halacha requires. The Rabbanim shouldn't be so hasty to write again. They should try to make shalom bayis. Because in Jewish tradition, a divorce is considered a serious tragedy. So Rav Elazar M never wanted to take salary for being a surrogate. So the people would pay whatever the traditional fee is to take care of a get. They had to pay the sofer, spend time, that's what he did for a living. Sometimes you have to pay the adim who come specially. But all the money that usually goes to the surrogate, he would keep in a separate account. And he would pass on all of that money to Rabbi Feinstein, whom he was friendly with when he was a teenager in Panovich. He was learning B'charus with him half a day, every day. And he would give all of the money from the Gittin to support Rabbi Michel's yeshiva. He would try to guide younger Talmidei Chachamim to have shimush and see the Gittin. Years ago, there used to be European Rabbanim on the side of the Gittin, and that was a big chunk of their parnassus, so they wouldn't teach. They wouldn't want to teach any younger Rabbanim how to do Siddur Gittin. They didn't want anybody master rule on their parnassus. And some of the people were decent enough to realize you have to prepare for the future. So Rav Elazar M prepared. He would teach younger people. Rabbi Jachter, we all know, in the Hakdama to one of his recent, he has many svarim, beautiful svarim. Hakdama to one of his recent svarim, he writes how he appreciates Rav Elazar M's guiding him in Siddur Gittin and other areas of Psak Halacha. Rabbi Jachter has published many beautiful Birurei Halacha, and his svarim and the essays that he has for the yeshiva, and these Birurei Halacha, he will often quote the opinion of Rabbi Teitz. Is what to quote. He was entitled to an opinion. Whenever a couple would come for a get, he would always try to understand each one's perspective. The husband didn't want to get a get, the wife didn't want to receive a get, whatever. And it made the couple feel much more comfortable because he understands them. He understands where they're coming from. Both parties would trust him because they felt that he understands them. And they felt he would give them a fair psak. I remember on one particular instance, he called me on the phone because I was a little involved in a get. I couldn't make out what's going on. People were giving misinformation. Husband and wife, everything was confusing. So he asked me, what do I think Yosha dictates? I told him I don't understand the case sufficiently. I can't give you any opinion of it. He waited. He was appointed as the shliach to deliver the get. The husband appointed him as a shliach to give her the get with no strings attached. Whatever you want, even if I'm authorizing you to give the get, whatever you think Yosha dictates. He wouldn't give the get until they both agreed that that's what Yosha dictates. I wasn't able to figure out heads and tails. He figured it out. He got them both to agree at the end that they both felt that they had a fair psak. In the Torah, he would often adjudicate monetary matters. One of the Mesmachim of the yeshiva in recent years was appointed as a dayan in a different city, not in New Jersey, and he called Rabbi Teitz to ask him for guidance. How do you do the Torah? So Rabbi Teitz mentioned to him the Gemara that says that a dayan who gets involved in himself in a monetary dispute with someone else, and the judge passed the dayan passes against this dayan, doesn't deserve to be called a dayan. So Rabbi Teitz said, why doesn't he deserve? Sometimes you have a monetary dispute and you think you're right. Then you go to Bezdin, Bezdin says you gotta pay, so you'll pay. So what's so terrible? Why doesn't he deserve to be considered a dayan? So Rabbi Teitz explained to the young Muslim from the yeshiva just appointed a dayan, because even if the dayan thought that he was right, Yosha dictates that he shouldn't wait till the judge passes against him. He thought he's 100% right. He should have suggested a pshara. It's my money, I'm entitled to all money. He should have suggested a pshara. That's what the Gemara says. Whenever Baladinim come from the Torah, it's a mitzvah on the part of the dayan to pressure the Baladinim. You can't force them, but to pressure the Baladinim to agree to pshara. So that was the avla of the dayan. So that young rabbi, who's now a dayan, far away from New Jersey, took that lesson to heart, and he said that he gets the Torah every week. He's a dayan in the Bezdin every week, He always pushes very much for pshara. One of the younger Rabbanim who teaches in yeshiva also has a rabbinical position. So he happened to be visiting in Eretz Yisrael for a brief stay. So he left his cell phone number by the bottom in the shul in case anybody has a shot. So one evening he was visited by a friend of his over there, and his cell phone rings. It's one of the Balabatim from New Jersey. The rabbi is a rabbi in New Jersey, and he has a shot. So the rabbi asked the friend of his whose home he was eating at, does he have this sefer? That's how the friend was a learned person. They didn't have sifrei psak that help you to figure out what the din is. So the rabbi was wondering, what am I going to do? So the friend of his happened to be a relative, this relative of Rav Elazar M. So he said, my relative, Rabbi Teitz, happens to be in Eretz Yisrael. Now call him up, he knows all the things. The rabbi called him up, and he told him what the din is, and he told him all the marmukavas. And he was able to paskin. The rabbi told him all that. He was really a rabbi's rabbi. He helped out the rabbis determining how to paskin. Rabbi Teitz, Zechron Livracha, was very makpid not to hurt people's feelings, to be aware of the fact that people are emotional, to be careful about their feelings. So he had a practice when they would be mechabed him at a wedding to read the Ksuba. He would always read it very quickly. Others have the practice to read it very slowly, because the whole purpose of reading a Ksuba is to make a pause in between Eris and the Yisulit, to make a longer pause. I remember I attended more than one wedding where Rabbi Elazar would fly in from Cincinnati, and they would mechabed him to read the Ksuba, and he would read it very slowly. And if you hear somebody talking, he would stop, and he would start from the beginning. The whole idea of reading the Ksuba is to spend time. And if the chazan wants to sing something, the rabbi wants to hold a drush under the chuppah, that's the best time. After the reading the Ksuba, the purpose of reading the Ksuba is to have a hafsokeh, because in the days of the Gemara, there was a pause of a year in between the Eris and Israel. So we don't have any pause. So Rav Elazar M felt if the Chas and Kala are fasting, they don't always fast. But if it's Rosh Chodesh or something, they don't fast. But if the Chas and Kala fast, he felt that it's not right, that he should take another 2 minutes to have to fast longer. So he would read the Ksuba very quickly. He was once asked to speak at a bar mitzvah that was on a Matzoi Shabbos, and the drushes were going on and on and on. It was already 5 minutes to 12. So they asked him to speak. So he got up and he said he was sharp on puns. So he said, the Mishnah says, V'chachamim ma'amrim ad chatzos. The rabbis can hold drushes. Mazel tov, goodbye. He sat down. That was the ganze drush. I remember an instance, Rabbi Teitz was once asked to be Messiah Kiddushin for a man who had sat in prison for his good Ma'asim Tovim, and he was in the process of becoming a Baal Tshuva. So Rabbi Teitz agreed, and not only that, he helped him, he assisted him later in rehabilitating himself, and he brought him back to a normal way of Torah mitzvahs, the way he used to be before he had to sit in prison. You all know Rabbi Teitz, Zechron Livracha, had a graduate degree in mathematics. A lot of people have graduate degrees, but they don't know plain arithmetic. So Rabbi Teitz was able to make mathematical calculations in his mind. So it was very common for him to speak at a simcha, Sheva Brochus, or a mitzvah or something, to make a gematria. And these are not always gematrias that he prepared in advance. He made a gematria based on what the previous speaker said. He made a gematria us, combining everything from before. But the Mishnah tells us gematria us are parparois. Some Rabbanim get up, they only say gematria, nocha gematria, nocha gematria. Rabbi Teitz always had tocha. He knew the gematria us are parparois. He knew what the chacham was. He really belonged to a different world. Reb Shmuel Rozovsky, he learned the Charusa with Rabbi Feinstein. These were people from a different generation. We should all realize who we're missing. He's the Baruch.
I'd like to call upon Rabbi Gil's student, author and publisher for Divrei Haskara.
Yeshiva, the Rabbanim, the Teitz family, Kal HaKadosh Hazeh. You've heard tonight, over the past 30 days, how Rav Elazar M was a respected community rabbi, a brilliant Talmid Chacham, and accomplished educator, who impacted the lives of thousands in his community. I'm here to talk about something completely different. The Gemara of Beis discusses a number of popular sayings and tries to find hints for them in the Torah. One of these sayings is Kadavina Zutre Kigavre. When we were little, we were like adults. Hashid de Kashisha Kidargiki. Now that we're old, we're like children. When we were young, when we were little, we're like adults. Now that we're old, we're like children. So there's a lot of depth, a lot of layers of meaning. I think in today's age, it's taken on a new meaning. It perfectly describes our interaction with technology. If you have a problem, you're someone like me with a little life experience, you're trying to figure out the settings on your phone, you ask your child or grandchild. The kids are like adults when it comes to technology. And those of us who are a little older, we're like children. That's the norm. Some people break away. Rav Elazar M was one such person when it came to the early internet. I'm not going to say he was a tech whiz, I have no knowledge of that. But despite his age, he was active in internet Torah learning from almost the beginning. He was a pioneering rabbi on the internet. Even before there was a World Wide Web, there was something called Usenet. And on Usenet there was a Jewish news group called Sock.culture.jewish.moderated SCJM. I don't see anybody nodding. In the mid-1990s, that was where all the online Torah was discussed. Rabbi Teitz was there. Under a pseudonym, he was experimenting with Jewish conversation online, and it was all very new at that time. Think back to the mid-90s. World Wide Web was new. Most of us were just getting our first email address, if we had it at all. Rabbi Teitz was in the thick of things, experimenting, seeing, and what he found was that there were people all over the world thirsty for Torah. And he engaged with them. He was answering questions, encouraging people. He realized if people need Torah, he would be there. But not as a rabbi. See, on the internet, the world is flat. There are no hierarchies. You can be the greatest expert in the world, and someone with no background is going to argue with you. But you can have Yagin from the chief rabbi of Israel, and someone with barely a Hebrew school education is going to say, no, you're wrong on the Torah, I know the Torah. So one possible way to correct this is to emphasize your pedigree and your accomplishments. A lot of people have tried that. It never works. Rabbi Teitz went in the opposite direction. Rabbi Teitz became part of the Chevra, equal to others whose arguments would stand on their own, not because of his authority. He used a pseudonym. Why? Maybe because he was a rabbi and he was experimenting on the internet or whatever, and he didn't want to use his name. Maybe. I think it's because he didn't want to claim authority, because he knew that would not work. If he came as the chief rabbi of Elizabeth, people wouldn't care. In fact, they would not focus on his ideas. Instead, they would focus on the person, which is not a good way to win and to convince. In September 1999, Rabbi Teitz sent his first contribution to the Avoda email list. So this email list, run for 2.5 decades by Rabbi Michael Berger, is a gathering of individuals of varying backgrounds, all devoted to discussing Torah online. Anonymity was not allowed, and I learned when I joined in November 1999, and they said, that's not your real name. Every topic under the sun has been discussed there, Londos, Moser, practical, halacha, diktum. Rabbi Teitz was there. His first contribution in September 1999 was comparing Hebrew and Aramaic grammar. Everything was on the table for discussion. So looking back, Rabbi Teitz focused on issues of tefillah and Lashon Kodesh. That's what he liked to discuss. But he responded to everything. I remember one time, he corrected a misunderstanding of Rabbi Kiva Eger. People think Rabbi Kiva Eger held that if on Friday night you say Good Shabbos, or if Friday afternoon, close to Shabbos, you say Good Shabbos, you're Mekabel Shabbos, you accept the restrictions of Shabbos on yourself. And Rabbi Teitz said, no, that's not the case. Rabbi Kiva Eger said, if on Friday night you say Good Shabbos, maybe you fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush on a biblical level. Big difference, big difference. Another occasion, I remember he discussed the difference between Emir Hashem and Be'ez Hashem. Emir Hashem, you say something that you plan on doing. Look, we're not in control of our lives. I plan on going to the dentist tomorrow. You say, Emir Hashem, I'm going to the dentist. Be'ez Hashem is what you hope will happen. Be'ez Hashem, he won't find any cavities. Rabbi Teitz wrote with precision and care. Now, when I apologize for typos in my emails and texts, what I'm really saying is I didn't bother to proofread it, I just typed and sent it. Because who does that nowadays, right? Who does that? Way back when, you might remember, you'd write a letter in longhand, you'd plan it out in advance, you'd think. But nowadays, who does that? Rabbi Teitz did that. Every email from him was meticulous. Meticulous. No spelling errors, no typos. All the dictum was correct, of course. So on Avoda and on the internet, Rabbi Teitz contributed, and I was there also when Rabbi Teitz contributed. It wasn't as frequently as everybody else. He was a very busy man. But what he did, he had read what everyone had said, he had thought about it, and he was responding thoughtfully. He also shared with us recollections from his youth, let's say in the 1950s in the Ponevezh Yeshiva. He said, everybody said Halal and Yom HaTzmaut, including Rav Shach. And he always pointed out that Laser Shach was really a Elazar, just like him, but they called him Laser anyway. Rabbi Abramsky, he said, when you spill the wine from the cup at the Seder, it's because we can't fully rejoice. When Hashem's creatures, the Egyptians, were drowning. He quoted Rabbi Abramsky as saying that. So in the earlier days of the internet, because I had a blog, so I would get a lot of Shiloh's emailed to me. So generally speaking, I say, ask the local Orthodox rabbi. But sometimes that clearly wasn't possible. So in those cases, I would forward the Shiloh to Rabbi Teitz. And he would respond, and sometimes he would copy me, and I'd be able to see how he handled that. To me, that was a little bit of shimmish, One Shiloh that sticks with me is someone had asked me, and I sent it to Rabbi Teitz, he had acquired artistic pictures and wasn't sure whether he was allowed to hang them in his house. One of them had a depiction of a Native American transformation scene with a raven. I'm not quite sure what that means. He sent it, so we had an image. So I said to Rabbi Teitz. So he copied me on the response. So he said two things. He said, first of all, maybe that's not the image that was worshipped itself. Maybe it's a depiction, a picture of something that was worshipped. Number one. Number two, maybe whoever made that picture, when he sold it, he nullified it. He was mevatel it. And if it's nullified, then it doesn't have the restrictions of an item for a Avodah. So therefore, ztvk'l is allowed, and then you can hang that in your home. I wouldn't have possibly. It's more complex than I can handle, and it was an honor for me just to witness this interaction. Unquestionably, the most remarkable aspect of Rabbi Teitz's writings is that he did not draw on his own authority. He treated everyone with equal respect and expecting nothing in return. And in fact, this humility and simplicity caused a crisis on the avodah list. Someone who didn't know who he was just kept calling him Elazar. And we were all embarrassed. It's embarrassing. So they changed the rules. Everybody had to be called by an honorific, so we wouldn't have such a scene. But Rabbi Teitz didn't care. That was his name. This was Rabbi Teitz's way of leading in the internet era. He did not assert authority, but to the opposite, he became part of the Chevra and he led by example. I remember one occasion in which he uncharacteristically, he issued a macha, he objected. Two people were disagreeing, and one of them started making fun of the other's name. And Rabbi Teitz would not have that. As a third party, he said, no, you're not allowed to, you're not allowed to do that. And by standing up for someone else's cover, by insisting on a respectful conversation, Rabbi Teitz immediately raised his tone and made everyone aware of all the obligations that we have to each other. At the beginning of Parashat Tetzaveh, Hashem commands Moshe, "V'ata kreve lech es Aaron asisov es banavito mitoch b'nei Yisrael l'chan oli." Right? And take unto you your brother Aaron and his sons with him from among the children of Israel to serve me. So why does Hashem say mitoch b'nei Yisrael? Where did he think Aaron and sons were? Of course they're part of b'nei Yisrael. So the Midrash sees great meaning in this phrase, which might explain a difficult halacha. The halacha is that a convert to Judaism, a full-fledged ger tzedek, right, who we are obligated to love and respect and accept, so may not serve in certain positions of communal authority. Right? Exactly how this is or is not implemented today, we're not talking about that. Our concern is, how do we understand it? How do we think about it? So there are different ways to think about it. I think this Midrash offers perhaps another path. The Midrash says that other nations, when they need a leader, they search around the world for the best that they can get. When they need a king, they'll marry off the princess to a prince from another kingdom or to a great warrior, and he'll be your king. When you need a priest, they find the best in the world and they lure him in, they hire him. Not the Jews. We promote from within. We have confidence that our communal leaders in their various capacities will rise to the occasion. They'll learn the landscape and they'll find the right skills that are needed in every situation. We promote from within and we let people rise to the challenges they face. And that's why I said, Mitov B'nai Yisrael, the Kohanim have to be specifically from our nation, not from anywhere else, and they will learn to be the Kohanim. So it's just a thought. But perhaps the Torah does not allow converts to serve in those roles of communal leadership to force us to promote from within and prevent the situation in which we find an outside candidate and convert it quickly. We grow our leaders organically and we challenge them to rise to the need of the hour. Rabbi Teitz was such a leader. While firmly positioned in the traditional rabbinate, he saw the internet developing and created a mode of leadership to fit this new medium. Instead of leading with rabbinic authority, he led with rabbinic example. Instead of dictating Torah views, he explained and argued for those views in the marketplace of ideas. In this bold new world, by lowering himself, he succeeded in raising others. Rabbi Teitz rose to the challenge and became the leader we needed with 25 years of success. May his memory be a blessing and an example for all of us on how to rise to a challenge in a new world and find the way to lead, the right way to lead in uncharted territory.
I'd like to call upon Rabbi Noah Goldstein, Rebbe Skokie Yeshiva, and nephew of Rav Teitz with Divrei Haskara.
Rav Schefter, my uncle, Rav Blau, the Rabbanim who are here, Kehila, and most importantly and hopefully, my uncle. The last few weeks, I received condolences from a number of people in Chicago, where I live with my family, who had heard that my uncle had passed away. And each time, I would try to describe my uncle. I would try to describe something about who he was. And every single time I walked away with a sense of frustration and a sense of despair, because it felt so shallow, it felt so pathetic. How could they can't get it. How could you possibly describe someone who was mind-boggling? And so I'm so grateful tonight to be here in this Tehillim, where people knew my uncle, so I don't feel pressure to do him justice, because I can't do him justice. And so instead, I'm just going to add my voice and add my perspective, and I especially want to thank my brother Akiva for his thoughts in helping make this task at least a little bit doable. A couple of weeks ago, when we read Parshas Yisro, Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu the plan for Matan Torah, but he has something very surprising. Because he tells him, Hinei anochi ba'alecha ba'avanan. Moshe, I'm going to speak to you from the clouds, speak to you directly, ba'avur yishma ha'am v'dabri imach. I want the whole nation to hear, as I am going to speak with you, everyone's going to see it. And then Hashem says, V'gam b'cha ya'amidu le'olam. And they will believe in you forever. And now the Mefarshim all have to ask, wait a second, this is Parshas Yisro. The people are going to believe in Moshe. That already happened last week in Parshas B'Shalach, Kriyas Yamsuf. Whatever happened to Vayaminu B'Hashem, Uv Moshe Avdo? I thought that Moshe finally got the people believing in him a week ago. Why 1 week later does Hashem have to tell Moshe Rabbeinu, I will speak to you face to face in front of everybody, so that the people will believe V'gam b'cha yaminu l'olam. And the Sforno of Yerachim and others explain that Bnei Yisrael did not doubt by now that Moshe Rabbeinu was a true Navi. That they already understood. But what they couldn't wrap their heads around was the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu could speak to Moshe Rabbeinu face to face. Under Nevuah, they believed it. They had already seen Ras Hashem Kalayam Mashal Ra Yechazkel Ben Buzi. They had seen unbelievable things. They believed Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah. But the idea of Panim, the idea that mortal man could speak face to face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Klal Yisrael they just couldn't believe. You could have as much intellectual, rational belief as possible. But this was too great a leap. And it had to be experienced in order to be believed. They had to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai in order to actually believe. And my uncle also was someone who we just had to experience in order to believe. You couldn't describe it. How could anyone do justice to him? It's not just that he was unique in one way. How many people do we know going through life who we can say are truly unique in one area? My uncle was unique in so many ways, and in ways which if we were reading in a book and hadn't known him, we would think they must be contradictory. Because think of it, he was the smartest person at least that I ever met, but he was also the most humble and definitely the most self-deprecating person I ever met. He was so swift, he was so quick, but he was also so patient and such a gifted teacher at any, and I mean at any level. He excelled at numbers, but he also excelled at wordplay. And as my father pointed out to me, while everyone talked about the mathematical genius behind the gematrias, what about the human genius behind the message of all the gematrias, and sometimes in very sensitive situations? My uncle's memory was awesome. Awesome. I was zocha to learn two summers ago. I was preparing to learn Hamafkid. I was going to be teaching Hamafkid to 11th graders. And I was zocha, he agreed to learn with Zuma once a day, once an hour a day during the summer. And he would just casually mention over the course of the chavrusa things that how his Rebbeinu tells, how they taught this Gemara more than 70 years ago. We skipped this part of the Gemara, they said this over here. The memory, awesome. And yet, so many people who have such an incredible memory lack creativity because they just fall back on the things that they know. My uncle's creativity was just as impressive. He would also casually mention Chidushim that he had over 70 years ago in Teitz. My uncle was scared. There was a certain natural intimidation about him that we all knew. He used to drive my wife crazy when there was a shayla we had to ask. And I would just procrastinate, pushing, and she would ask, just ask, just pick up the phone and pause. Yeah, but I have to prepare. How exactly? You don't just pick up the phone and ask the question. I have to think, how exactly am I going to do this? It was just a natural intimidation. And yet at the same time, someone who was so warm, so caring, so generous. Contradiction after contradiction, but they all were in him. And finally, to get to the really important ones. My uncle was so clever. He could come up with the angle or the perspective that you never would. It could be whether it was a shiloh, or it was just a joke he would say, and it would leave you laughing, it would leave you shaking your head. And yet for someone who would always come up with the angle, with the take, he was the most straightforward, yashar person that so many of us ever knew. He knew so much intellectual sophistication. That was my uncle. But he had such a basic, such a simple emunah pshuta beyond that. And finally, my uncle embodied Torah. He was Torah. He lived it. He breathed it. He was all Torah. And yet at the same time, he was utterly down to earth, a person of this world. And the truth is, there's one key to all of this, which I think was the essence of my uncle and which makes his loss so irreplaceable. And that was Masorah. Masorah, not the way Masorah is translated, tradition, like what you have at Thanksgiving dinner or whatever. No, the Masorah. The Moshe Kibel Torah Umasar LeYoshua Masorah. My uncle was a tangible, living link in the chain of the Torah Shabbal Peh, going back to Matan Torah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Torah to Moshe, who gave it to Yeshua, who gave it to the Zakenim, to the Tanoim, to the Amoraim, the Rishonim, Achronim, to Rabbi Feinstein, to Shul Rozovsky, and my grandfather, to my uncle. Torah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu were alive in my uncle in a way that just cannot be described or written about. It could only have been experienced. Because that's what's true Masorah. That's what true Torah Shabbal Peh is all about. Something I can only appreciate from having had this with us to know. There was a visceral reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu when interacting with my uncle. So smart but so humble. My uncle knew that his intellectual gifts were just given to him by the Rebbeinu Shalom, just as much as I know that I'm up here talking with a microphone in my face. When I was in 11th grade, I took calculus, and it was not going well. The first exam was coming up, and I was going to fail. I did not have a clue what was going on. So that Motzei Shabbos, before the exam, went down to Elizabeth, sat down on my uncle's kitchen table, and he taught me the material. Not enough to get 100, but enough to get by. And that started a bit of a family tradition for us. Now, my academic math career ended after 11th grade. But my brother, Akiva, majored in math, and fast forward just a few years later, they're sitting in the JC, in my uncle's office, studying for some advanced calculus course. And my uncle casually says to my brother, as he's explaining a way to understand a certain problem, "Oh, yeah, this is how it made sense to me when I taught it to myself when I was 12. He knew the Rebbeinu Shalom gave him that gift, and that it was literally nothing to brag about. It's because of my uncle I feel like I can have a clue what it meant for Moshe Rabbeinu to be the Anav Mikol Adam, the humblest man alive, ever. Like HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'havdil b'makom b'dulaso shamata motzi agasanusa. In the place of my uncle's greatness, there you saw his humility. A shayla from anybody, at any time, my uncle was there. A simcha, he was there. A funeral, he was there. Driving the varsity basketball team, he was there. Nothing was below him and nothing was above him. In our family as kids, if we ever had what we thought was a good kasha, we called it an Uncle Luz question. And although only my sister had the guts to ask them with any reasonable frequency, he had such a joy in responding. It was that living Masorah that I think explained how my uncle could simultaneously be so forbidding and yet so warm. How he could be the most intellectually sophisticated person any of us knew, and yet have such profound, simple emunah. It was the Rebbeinu Shalom in him, no more and no less. That's just the way it was. The same was for my uncle's yashrus, or his learning. There were several times that summer we learned, and Rav Shafter might shake his head and smile at this, when I kind of ran through some of the Rashis, because I was excited to just get to the main conceptual point of the sugya. And my uncle would stop me and pause and ask a simple question on a Rashi we had done. And all of a sudden, we needed to spend 20 minutes interrogating some major problem, in which, of course, he would casually drop references across Shas, Tosas all over, Because the sugya mattered. It was real. And there would be no shortcut, no skipping, only understanding each and every point by point by point. It was real, it was true. And of course, often he would begin learning by apologizing that he wasn't feeling well, and he wasn't sure how to learn he would be that day. And except for one day, the learning brought him to life every single time. I was zocha to see Torah's chaim in every sense of the word. And this is how I think my uncle could be so suffused with Torah, and yet also be so down to earth. It was all simply natural. That was Masorah. It was real. My uncle was just real. We remember how he transcended religious labels and categories. And he would say, the only kind of Jew is a Torah Jew. A Torah Jew lives in the world, and a Torah Jew lives in the world. A Torah lives in the world. My uncle and my brother and I were talking about our strongest memories, and there are so many. But there are three that stand out for me that I just wanted to share quickly. At my oldest son's bris, where my uncle was doing the Kriya Shem, and I told him the name Pinchas Yehoshua, and my uncle choking up a little bit as he said the name, his connection to my grandfather. Number two, going to a Mets-Astros game with my uncle, one Chol Pesach, on what I could have sworn, I really could have sworn, I really thought it was my first ever baseball game, until this past week when I started trying to research to figure out what exactly the game was. See, I do not have my uncle's memory. So I just remember the important detail of the game. As a Yankees fan, what was the important part of the game? That the Mets blew the lead in the 8th and 9th inning. They lost. They ended up losing 4-3. Now, it turns out this game was April 27th, 1998, when I was already 9. And so there was no way that by 9 years old, that was my first baseball game. But in my head, it just stuck that way. In my head, it was that my uncle, Rav Teitz, was the one who took me to my first game and teaching me how to keep score. And the way he would do it was in a tiny handwriting so he could keep space. Ezo Chacham Aros and Nola, you never know, is the game going to go to extra innings, and you have to have space for the 10th inning, 11th inning, and the 12th inning. Now, if I brought up the game with him now, he'd probably point out that given the way the Astros cheated against the Yankees a few years ago, we really should have rooted for the Mets together with him against the Astros, but we didn't. And the third and the strongest image that my brother and I agreed on, we both have, is when we were in yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, and we were able to spend a couple of Shabbosim with my aunt and my uncle at their apartment in Yerushalayim. And the image of just sitting Friday night, the image of my uncle sitting in his armchair with no jacket, no tie, sitting in a short-sleeved shirt, and just talking a mix of Torah and stories and Torah and other things with Torah just constantly weaved in, just constantly streaming through. All just so natural and so real. The simple, living Masorah. Everyone knows how much my uncle loved the Daf Yomi. And I thought of a few very, very strong references to him in the Daf since his Petira. Rabbi Jackter pointed out in his Hesped the connection that on the day of the Petira was where the Gemara has the psak about Hesped being for the honor of the Nifta. It's almost as if the Gemara couldn't reach that maskana until my uncle was not there to fight back. But I'll just share the one that hurts because of how much it hits home. And that's on Sanhedrin Samachas Amar Aleph, the end of the 7th parak of Sanhedrin, where the Gemara describes the Petira of Rav Elazar M, who had soaked up so much Torah Shabbat Peh, and now is moving on to the Olam Ha'as. And Rav Elazar says to Talmidim, Harbe Torah limadati, v'harbe Torah lo madati. I taught a lot of Torah, I learned a lot of Torah. Harbe lamadati me rabosai, I learned so much from my Rebbeim, v'lo chisarti afilu kekelev hamalakik min hayam. And Rav Elazar said, I feel like I haven't taken more than a dog takes when he laps up from the ocean. And that was definitely my uncle's self-perception about his relationship with his Rebbe, as much as all of us would roll our eyes at it. And then Rav Elazar continues, Harbe Torah limadati, taught a lot. But they've only taken away from me like the amount of little brush of paint takes if you take one dip of paint. That's how much we're able to take. And halavai, that was how much we were able to take from him. His loss is something that we know can never be replaced. But it also underscores how privileged and blessed we were to have him with us for all these years. And it obligates us to try to live up to the example that he set. May he, now reunited with my grandfather in the Olam Ha'as, be a Me'eletz Yocher for this family, for our family, this community, and all of Klal Yisrael. Ad B'yaseh Gadol. Amen.
Now I call upon Rabbi Teitz, principal ztvk'l, and the son of our Rav. A little housekeeping first. I'll start with the Siyum of Shas. When somebody passes away, there's a custom that people take different masechtos, different tractates of the orders of the Mishnah to complete them by the 30th day of the Shloshim, the 30th day after the passing. And I remember the first time I did this, I said, oh, I'm going to take the last Masechta. I'm going to take Uktzim, because that way I get to finish. And then I started reading it. I was pretty young, bar mitzvah, whatever. Masechtas Uktzim is not something you get into very easily. You think it's the end, what are they going to do? Easy halachos. So they get deep into the weeds of ritual purity and impurity, about stems hanging on fruit. Do they become tamei? It was beyond me. So whoever took uktzim, yashar too. But after all of that discussion, and after the end of all of Mishnah, there are two statements that get added afterwards. Post of Yehuda Hanasi statements. Omer Mishum Levi. Osi Zakosh Baruch Hu Lahanfil L'Chol Tzadik et Tzadik Shloshim Yos V'Asar Olos. God will give each righteous person in the future, which is understood after he passes away, 310 words. Shenamar Lahanfil Ohavai Yesh. To give as an inheritance to those who love me, yesh. Yud Shin is 310, numerical equivalent, gematria, of course. That's a Spartan living with gematria. I did one at the funeral, that was enough. And I will fill their stories. Omer Rishon Chalaf. Rishon Chalaf says, Lo matzah Baruch Hu kli machzir bracha Yisrael al Shabbat. There's no vessel that holds blessing for the Jewish people like peace. Hashem should give strength to his people. He should bless us with peace. 18 months almost, that we could not have peace in the Jewish people. God, stop it, please. And then suffering. And then suffering. That's the last word of the Mishnah. Hatron Allah Misachas Uktzim, Oslikol Ashisha Sivri Mishnah. Hatron Allah Shisha Sivri Mishnah B'Hachachal. Datan Allah Shisha Sivri Mishnah B'Hachachal. Nisna Sheminach, Shisha Shisha Mishnah, Sisni Sheminan, Global Abadin, Global Abadas. Hadron Allah, Shisha Shisha Mishnah, Badrach Allah. Daidat Allah, Shisha Shisha Mishnah, Daidat Allah. Nisna Sheminach, Shisha Shisha Mishnah, Sisni Sheminan, Global Abadin, Global Abadas. Hadron Allah, Shisha Shisha Mishnah, Badrach Allah. We shall return to you the orders of the Mishnah. Return to us.
Our thoughts are on the laws of the Mishnah, and your thoughts should be on us. We will not forget you. The orders of the Mishnah, please don't forget us. Not in this world, nor in the future world. מודים אנחנו לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, ששמת חלקנו מיושבי בית המקדש ושמת חלקנו מיושבי קורנוס. שאנו משכימים והם משכימים, אנו משכימים מדברי תורה, והם משכימים מדבר מדבריהם. אנו עמלים והם עמלים, אנו עמלים לקבלם שכר, והם עמלים ואין לנו לקבל שכר. אנו רוצים והם רוצים, אנו רוצים לחיי העולם הבא, והם רוצים לדבר שחס, שנאמר ואתה אלוהים, תורידם לדבר שחס, אנשי גם מרמה, לא יחץ מהם, ואני יפתח לך. ירצום לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהינו, כשם שעזרתנו לסיים בשישה סייום ומשנה, כן תעזרנו להשכיל סדרים אחרים לסיימו, ללמוד ולמד, מתוך הרחבה, לשמוע ולעשות ולקיים כל דברי סמכות ושכל האהבה. ויסחוס כל התנאים, ותלמידי חכמים המזכרים בשישה סייום ומשנה, ובכל הספר שלנו, יעמוד לנו ולזרענו ולזרע זרענו, שלא תמוש התורה הקדושה מפינו ומפי זרענו וזרע זרענו מעתה ועד עולם. וקיים בנו מכל שכתוב, ויסלחך תנחל צח, ושפחת ישמור לך, והקצץ כיסיסך. כי הביאו ירוי עמך ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים, אורך ימים ומצוות מימינה, ושמאלה אושר וכבוד, אדוני עוז ולא ייתן, אדוני יברך את עזרת השם. I want to start first by wishing a mazel tov to my mother, to my sister Yael and her husband Moshe, to my niece Rachel and her husband Chesky, on the birth last week in the naming on Friday. Well, those are ready to talk. With the Shloshim, here we're resting. She's been hacking this thing. So when we finish in the seven, we usually go and start the next one, because Torah never ends. For those who can't remember, that's a very famous saying. Torah never ends. We start right again from the very beginning. When do we start reading the Shema in the evening? She says, from the time that the Kohanim come to eat their truma, the Kohanim were very fastidious. They kept very careful time, and they knew that at certain times they had to wait until it was nightfall before they could eat some of their priestly foods. And if you see them eating their food, you know it's nighttime, and you can recite Shema. How late? Until the end of the first third of the night. Diva Rabbi Elazar. Chachamim say no, not such a short window. A little more time, till midnight. Rabbi Gamliel says no, until dawn. Plenty of time, the whole night. And just as we shouldn't feel bad about the trouble we have with our children trying to get them to daven on time, the Mishnah says, Rabbi Gamliel's own kids came home from a wedding late. Oh, well, can we do the Shema? We forgot to say Shema. I feel good, okay. You know, my kids, they oversleep sometimes, or, you know, they... Rabbi Gamliel, who's the leader of the Jewish people, his own kids, came home from a wedding. So I said, no, don't worry about it. The time is until Amud HaShachar, until dawn. So you're still obligated to read. And there are other situations as well where the rabbi said till midnight, but really means later on. So the question is, in Canaan, that's the case. Why didn't the rabbis just say, do it until dawn? If that's really the time, why give it an earlier time? So the Mishnah answers, so the person shouldn't fall into a trap where he assumes he's got more time and then he'll end up missing it. Now, of all of the laws in Judaism, why did Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi pick this specific one to be the first that he mentioned? Many answers are given. Well, you know, if a person comes to bar mitzvah, nighttime, first thing to do is say Shema. Except if he opens the door for his father to walk in, then he's been kind of keep without again before he says Shema. So, you know, there has to be something more than a simple answer like that. So the question is why? And I think the end of the mission is the answer, is the key. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi wrote the Mishnah around the year 200. We'll play ballpark. What was the Jewish nation like at that time? They had gone through the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash of the temple. They had gone through the decimation of the Bar Kokhba revolt. There were groups during the time of the temple that were already straight. The Sadducees, the Essenes, the Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls, there were sects that were at that time that were straying from Torah. By the year 200, Christianity was making significant inroads into the Jewish community. And here's Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince, the head of rabbinic Judaism. How is he going to convince people that this is the way to observe? This is what Judaism is about. So he said the rabbis weren't here to make restrictions and make your life miserable. They're here to try to make sure that you adhere to the law. L'harki adam min avera. The entire corpus of Jewish law is so that we should live a life within the boundaries of Torah law. Now there are two ways to come look at that. The Sadducees and the Essenes decided to just cut off parts of Judaism, and in our own lifetimes we have seen the more liberal branches of Judaism take parts and just say, well, they're not obligations anymore. I can live within the box of Jewish law if I make the box very small and say that all the prohibitions are on the outside. Then it's easy to stay on the inside. That's not what he was doing. There's the other extreme of making everything prohibited. That way, for sure, you won't do anything wrong. But the Talmud, the Gemara already says that just as it's forbidden to say about something that is permitted, to call it prohibited, I'm sorry, doesn't it not say something is prohibited, is permitted, you're also not allowed to take something that's permitted and say you're not allowed to. Jewish law has to have moderation, middle of the road, not extremism. I would like to think that if my grandfather and my great-grandfather came to Elizabeth now, they would very much recognize the Judaism that we practice. Because the truth is, the outlook, the hashkafa, the philosophy, it's been the same for 100 years. There's been a consistency to that. And that's largely due to my family's involvement in the rabbinate here. I won't say exclusively, but in large part. So, in thinking about the rabbinate and my family, the animating credo, and I'll show you two examples, the foundational belief of our family's rabbinic stewardship of the Elizabeth Jewish community. Not ownership, not monarchy, stewardship. The stewardship from my great-grandfather, Rav Elazar M, to my grandfather, Rav Mordechai Teitz, to my father, to my cousin, Rabbi Black, in his years that he was here, to myself. And now we see the next generation, the millennials in the family coming forward, with Rabbi Noah Goldstein and his beautiful remarks. A consistency throughout of servant leadership. We are here to serve the community. Prioritization of serving others over all personal considerations. That's what we did. My Zaydi prayer. We say a few stories about him in the family. Many of you might have heard them already, but it just shows this philosophy. There was a disagreement in the 20s, it seems, and earlier, about what bracha to make on bananas. It's a very famous Teitz prayer family story. What bracha do you make on bananas? Is it ha'etz? Is it ha'adama? What do? Rabbi Brill says it's ha'adama. And I will show you by my personal example that that's true, because I will use it in an instance where you must use something that's ha'adama, and that's how we got bananas for karpas. Personal example. My great-grandfather's primary income was from supervising slaughterhouses. And there was a rabbi in the neighboring town, his name was Rabbi Zuber, who was a real tzaddik to my great-grandfather, to my grandfather. And my great-grandfather called Rabbi Zuber and said he wants to give up the supervision. He says, you can't do it anymore. Rabbi Zuber said, why not? He said, I'm afraid of your responsibility. Everybody's relying on my say-so that it's kosher. Rabbi Zuber said, you'd rather someone who's not afraid of the responsibility? My grandfather kept it. Great-grandfather kept it. And when he passed away, there were many rabbis who were enough to support a family who wanted that position. Rabbi Zuber announced that he was taking the supervision and giving the money to the widow to support her family. So that's how my great-grandmother lived, through Rabbi Zuber's incredible margins. Another famous story about my great-grandfather. He passed away on Erev Sukkot. These are stories we grew up with. More the founder of the Elizabeth community than my grandfather, but even he wasn't the founder, because the Elizabeth community predated us by 40 years. It's been here since the 1880s. But still, Rabbi Brill was the first of our family here in Elizabeth. He passed away in Erev Sukkot. A few hours before he passed away, he calls Rabbi Zuber again and says, you must come home right away to the church. Rabbi Zuber knew exactly how difficult my grandfather was. Came running over, lived in Moselle. He had a car, made it over, didn't take that long, there weren't that many cars in those days. And my great-grandfather tells Rabbi Zuber, he says, I have all the love and struggle for the people in Shul. if I pass away before Sukkot, my son, Rabbi Yosef, well, he wasn't Yosef, Rabbi then, he was a Shiur, or Uncle Shiur to us. He will inherit all on this road. He's 8 years old. He won't be able to religiously, halachically, pass those on to anybody else. I want you to take ownership of these, the little Nesro before Sukkot. So if I die before Sukkot, you can give it to the Baal. And in fact, he did die before Sukkot. These are the stories that we grew up with about what a rabbi does. This is the rabbi, servant leadership, giving to the people. The rabbi is not a means to impose personal views. It's to look out what's for best for the community, to bring people closer to Judaism. My father had, personally, lots of homeworks that he kept for himself. People said my father did not trust the Erev that he built here. His own Erev, he didn't trust it. And I stand here to tell you he absolutely did trust it. He wore gloves on Friday night in the wintertime. Because when he read halacha, it says that you should not wear gloves because you might take them off while you're walking home to shake somebody's hand, and inadvertently carry your gloves in an area of that Erev. So the whole time Israel did not have an Erev, he did not wear gloves. As soon as it was an Erev, he said, I'm going to show that I trust the Erev, and he wore gloves. He let me carry other stuff. He never made any problem with that, for himself personally. But he wasn't going to impose that on the community. That was his personal belief. I remember growing up, my father would not let my mother buy Empire chicken points. Because maybe they took a piece of the chicken from here and a piece of the chicken from there, and the other piece that you're not seeing had a rabbinic question about whether it was kosher or not. And you'd never know. It took years before he let us buy chicken points. But he never told the people in town not to buy chicken points. My father only used products on Pesach that were around when he was a child. So that meant oil and wine and matzah, and that's about it. My father used to love telling us that his job was to churn the butter. For Pesach, that was his job. And I always imagine sitting there with all those conical churns going up and down, like you see, from the 1800s. That was a little jar with a little handle. It's an easy thing to do. And that was his big job for Pesach, to churn the butter. So no products, which was my mother, and we had to cook and bake everything from scratch. The food never tasted so good, because there was no artificial anything in it. But it wasn't a challenge. He wouldn't eat chocolate, but he let us eat chocolate. So all the good desserts we got. No products at home, except of course the last day of Pesach, where it seems that chametz is permitted in Jewish homes. Just ask any chassid who goes and eats gebrox on the 8th day of Pesach, and we ate products. So, okay. So he did not impose his views. It went so far as when I came into the rabbi, and I discussed with my father questions that used to come to me from women about going to the mikveh. I'm not going to go into detail here, but those who understand. My father had a very strong understanding that made it difficult for women about colors and things like that. And when I was at Yeshiva University, I learned from Rabbi Willig a different approach. When my father would get asked questions, he would say, take this to my son, because he has a different approach. He was confident enough in himself and in his rabbinate that he can go and say, go to my son, because I'm not going to impose my strict view now that there's somebody else that I trust to give it different. Servant leadership. So one short story about myself, just for the rabbis in the room, especially those who are just starting out within the first 10 years, let's say, of the rabbi. A woman came to me with a question, one of these sorts of questions, and I looked at it, checked it, and told her, it's fine, it's not a problem. was a woman who had children in her 20s. So she'd been married for quite a while. And she walked down to the hall, and down the hall, I had to come out to see something, and I see her go down the hall going, yes! Because she could go to the mikveh that night. We have to understand the power of small decisions. Whether it's a student asking a question in class, the congregant coming with a query, we have to understand that as rabbis, we have tremendous power over people's lives. We have to step back and appreciate that and keep that in mind when we make decisions that impact other people. My grandfather, as you all know, was a master builder of the community. What he didn't do, Torah study on the radio, because internet wasn't invented yet, otherwise he would have been there too. On the radio in the 1950s. The first Jewish elementary day school in the state of New Jersey. The first boys' high school, Jewish boys' high school in the state of New Jersey. The first girls' high school in the state of New Jersey. When he came to Elizabeth, there was no mikveh. And he told the Balabatim that when he got married, he needed 6 months, and he'd come back and he'd report to them about what his plans were. And he came back and he said, okay, what are your plans? He said, I'm leaving. He said, Rabbi, I just got here, can you leave? He says, because the halacha says, Jewish law says that you need a mikveh in a town. If there's no mikveh in a town, you can't live there. He got his mikveh. Excuse me. Cemetery, Eruv, everything. When I got married, my grandfather said, what projects are you working on? I said, projects? I just got married. I'm starting out my life. I said, you have to have projects. You can imagine his words. You have to have projects. Because if you're not improving something, you're losing ground. And when he passed away, and it was after the Shloshim, and my father and I went through the office to start sifting through papers, because he didn't think to do it beforehand. We found pamphlets and booklets and papers of things that my father didn't even know my grandfather was planning on doing. He was just this incredible fountain of creativity for the Jewish community, not just in Elizabeth. But that was not my father. My father was not. In fact, he was almost diametrically the opposite. He was not the outgoing, dynamic. He was dynamic, but he was not that outgoing personality on the world stage. And as I said at the funeral, my grandfather was blessed to have my father as a son to take care of the running of the community so that he could be on the world stage doing what he needed doing for world Jewry. My grandfather would not have been able to go to Russia 22 times, if not for my father being here to mind the shop. So that was his perspective. His perspective was, I maintain. And maintained and grew. Daf Yomi was an outcome, an outgrowth of his learning here, and his creating the shir, his being asked to create the shir and then doing it. And things were intermingled. The rabbinate, the school, the community, the mikveh, the eruv, was all one umbrella. Which is great, so long as you have one person at the top leading it all. Challenge moving forward is how that's going to play out between the school and the community. Conversation for another time, but something that requires deep thought. I would be remiss if I did not mention my father's and grandfather's liberalism. They were proud liberals. My grandfather in 1963 spoke at the Polo Grounds and a rally for the March on Washington for Dr. Martin Luther King. He represented Jewry of the entire United States. He was the one Jew speaking. There were very few speakers, 5 or 6. He was the one who represented all of us. I remember Federation years ago had a big gathering to discuss government restriction of abortions. And they asked an Orthodox rabbi, a conservative rabbi, and a Reform rabbi to speak. And thankfully my father did not say, why don't you do it? He took that one himself. And everybody, he was the last speaker, and everybody was expecting, okay, here comes the right-wing Orthodox rabbinic harangue that's prohibited, and you can't do it, etc. And my father gets up and says, the government has no right to tell a woman what to do. That's between her and the people in her life. Doctor, at the time it said spouse, now it's significant other, and religious guidance. The government has no say in that. Shocked people. But that's who he was. And that's how he grew up. That's the house he grew up in. One quick story about his humility. I mentioned it at the Shiva, but it's worth repeating. There was a family here in Elizabeth that was a Lithuanian rabbinic bent and had many relatives who were considered significant rabbis. And they were having a wedding here right outside under what used to be the basketball hoop. That's where the chuppah was set up. In the summertime, my grandfather was in Russia. So my father was acting head of the city, and the rabbis in the family knew that it's only respect that you give the rabbi of the town one of the blessings under the canopy, under the wedding canopy. So they called the first speaker, called up for the first blessing, Hagon, Haggadah, on and on with the laudatory titles, so and so. The second, the third one, each one more flowery than the next. Then, one of the later brachos, Rav Elazar M Teitz, next bracha. Okay, went up, got his blessing, came home, he was laughing. The greatest thing happened at the wedding. He told me the story about all the titles and all that stuff, and about him they called him Rabbi Teitz. He said, about me they didn't lie. That was him. He was a giant of humility. His kibbud av, I don't know how anybody can stand up and compare themselves to him. He gave up whatever life dream he might have had to come and be the rabbi here in Elizabeth with his father. He was a humble giant of servant leadership. My mother confided in me one time, a number of years ago. She said, when I came to Elizabeth, my parents were engaged. It took a while until they got married. My mother thought, I'll come, we'll get married, we'll go back to Israel, and everything will be wonderful. That was her understanding of the agreement between her and my father. After a few months here, she understood that that wasn't quite the plan. And my mother confided in me she had to choose between the love of a man and the love of her land. And I thank God that she chose the man, because otherwise I wouldn't be here. So her plan is to move to the land of her love and to spend her time with my 4 siblings. I'm the only one who's left here. And she'll come back, take care of things, but ultimately her plan is that she will live in Israel. There are many people here who are concerned, deeply concerned, about what the future is going to bring. Rabbi Feinstein seems to assume that I'm taking over. His words, not mine. I did not plan that phrase. I don't know. Honestly, I do not know. Some people are anticipating the end of the Teitz dynasty, if you will, in Elizabeth. It's a giant question. But I want the community to understand what you'll lose without having a Rabbi here. Moral and religious stability for over 100 years. As I said, my great-grandfather could walk here and say, I recognize the Judaism of this town. A single religious standard for the town. The servant leadership that imbued and infused every decision. A single clear voice of Allah. To the community and to the rabbis, remember the first mission. The idea of Jewish law is to keep us within the framework of Jewish law. It's not to impose your views on other people. It's to be with the people where they are. That's the job of the rabbi. We are told that we should make a fence around the Torah. It's part of to keep somebody from sinning. Put a fence. The fence doesn't have to be a 10-foot high brick wall with razor wire at the top. It can be a picket fence with a gate that can be easily opened to allow people to come in at whatever level they are. This community has been blessed that everybody is welcome here. From all walks of life, from all religious streams. You're welcome here. That has to stay. Remember the power of small decisions, the power we wield over people's lives. And most important, remember servant leadership. Service to others over our own needs. The Siyum that I said, the end of the Mishnah, it's bookends. On one end you have keep people from straying and learn Torah so that you'll know the right things to do. And you might think it's a very transactional life. I learn so I don't sin. Okay. So the end of the Mishnah says that's not all. God says, to those that love me, I have rewards for you that you cannot even comprehend. And it's immeasurable. And the clean mouth, the vessel that holds blessing of peace. Keep the peace. Make sure that always there's peace. On Har HaZeitim, on the Mount of Olives, the Perel family has a family plot. 10 graves in a row. At the head is my Zaidi, Rav Elazar M. Down the row is my Saba, or as everybody else in the family calls him Zaidi, Rabbi Mordechai Feinstein. A month ago, my father was laid to rest there as well. Look and see what you three did in Africa. See all you've accomplished. Enjoy your eternal rewards. Nuhu b'shalom amishkafcha. Chazan Ira Heller to say the memorial prayer of the Kelmon Rachman. My father loved his voice. Didn't quite like that he said it, Donovan started. But we'll forgive that for tonight.
One of the best compliments I ever got was from Rabbi Teitz when he told me he liked my Hebrew.
Rav Elazar M ben Morenu Rabbeinu Mordechai Pinchas Shalach li'olamo Bavur Shehanu Mipalelim Uvili neden niten tzedakah bat hazkarat nishmato Began Eden Tehillim menuchato Lachein nimhal harachamim Yastidehu b'seitek knafav li'olamim V'yitzro ha'chayim et nishmato Adonai u'nachalato V'yaduach b'shalom ha'mishkavo
In one way or another, since 1941, which was the year the school opened. I was one of the original students in the school. And of course I lived it because my father was the one who created it and devoted heart and soul to it and made it what it should be. My father and others like him said that it was intended not only to serve the community of Elizabeth, but to serve as a model for others to emulate. Our mission is to give that which is needed for the maintenance and preservation and dissemination of Yiddishkeit. My father always felt that what was central to Yiddishkeit was Jewish education. And as long as we were aware of that and never satisfied with what we got, always seeking to improve, that's Baruch Hashem what keeps it alive, thriving, and inspirited. The one thing that has stayed the same, and the New Hashem will always be the same, is that foremost is the idea of producing Torah between Jews, seeing to it that what has been transmitted to us is transmitted honored in an unending chain to inculcate the learning of Torah and through it the living of Torah to come to the loving of Torah. May you all continue that, be it here or in B'Yasavil, continuing with Yerushalayim. The coming of the Gula Shlema of the Meir B'Yamin.
I would like to thank everybody for coming out and joining us tonight to pay tribute to the Rav. In 5 minutes, there will be a minyan from Mara in this room, and there is a reception in the Goldfish Gym, which is sponsored by the Rahmani Brothers. We invite everybody to attend. Thank you.
Hi, Rabbi. How are you?